everyone, welcome back to episode 7 of Debunked. We are so excited for today's episode, but before we jump into today's topic, we have to take it back a few episodes because me and Taz have a funny story to tell you guys, and I think the majority of you, well, we know that the majority of you listen to us on Spotify, so you wouldn't have seen this. There's a small portion of you who do watch us on YouTube, but episode 4 we obviously put out the flat earth episode and we kind of knew this was coming, but yes, we have been harassed by flat earth, what do we even call them, the flat earth cult. The flat earthers, we have been harassed by them. So there was some guy on YouTube called like Flatzoid or something like that, so he's got a YouTube channel dedicated to flat earth, and he live reacted to mine and Taz's podcast episode, which was the funniest thing ever. But anyway, because he did this, we had a swarm of flat earthers come to the YouTube video, and it's just the most bizarre thing ever. Me and Taz were like, what the hell is going on? Because we just started getting comments out of nowhere, and we were like, where are these all coming from?
Yeah, literally, it was actually wild. And then I managed to find the stream, and me and Liv were just watching it, and we found it so funny because in a bit of it they were talking about how firstly how we look like college students, and I was like, slay, care routine is paying off. And then secondly they were like, oh, we don't know if they're scientists, I think they just claim to be scientists, like they don't seem very bright.
Well, part of me is like, do you know what? Fair enough. Like, I can't even argue with that.
Oh, they don't talk like scientists, and I'm like, true.
I mean, that is the point of the podcast.
I'll tell you, my favourite part actually was they got to a point in the video where I said that simulation theory, which is something that we covered on in an earlier episode, had more scientific basis than the flat earth theory, and they lost their mind, and they were like, this girl is dumb as a bag of hammers. And I was like, oh god.
Oh, so funny, so funny.
But here's to like not talking like scientists and looking like we're still in college.
100%.
Cheers to that.
Oh, skincare routine, makeup, 𝗃𝘂𝗶𝗯𝗯 foundation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, guys,
anyway,
if you want like a in-depth skincare routine, let us know and we will provide the goods.
Oh, this is funny. Okay, anyway, let's move on to the next conspiracy theory that we are going to be tackling. So today we are talking all about whether dinosaurs are real and whether the asteroid ever really hit the Earth. This was inspired by a recent zoo trip that I took with my friend, where we were looking at the giraffes and my friend said, oh my god, they kind of look low-key like dinosaurs. And then we got into a debate about like whether dinosaurs were ever actually real, and I said, do you know what, Fran, let me do an episode on it and I'll come back to you with all of the facts. So yeah, let's get into it.
This is Debunked by the soculturedpodcast,
hosted by Liv and Taz, two girls exploring the world of science and tech, unfiltered.
This season, we're separating fact from fiction as we dive into the world's most controversial conspiracy theories by seeing if science can prove or disprove them.
And of course, we're still serving up the laboratory
because the STEM world is messier than you think.
Don't forget, all opinions are our own, and all of our listener stories are alleged. Let's get into this week's episode of Debunked.
It's 1994. A father takes his daughter to the Natural History Museum in Chicago. She's around 7 years old and she's quite small for her age. But she walks into the main hall and freezes. Towering above her is an enormous skeleton. Razor teeth, thick legs, a tail that curves like a whip. It's a T-Rex. She grabs her dad's hand and whispers, "Was that real?" He nods and says, "Yep, lived millions of years ago." But just behind them, another man stares up at the same dinosaur and laughs. "Fake," he said. "That thing's a cast. They didn't find all of those bones. They made half of it up." The father hears, turns around and says, "What?" And the man shrugs. "They never found a full dinosaur," he said. "They just fill in the gaps. All of them are guesses. It's all fake." Years later, the girl still remembers that exact moment because now she's hearing the same thing online. On TikTok, YouTube, podcasts, Dinosaurs never existed. The bones are made of plaster. The asteroid never hit. The fossils are fake. Evolution is a lie. And suddenly she's wondering, what if that man was right? What if the dinosaurs are the biggest hoax in science? Well, in today's episode, let's treat this conspiracy theory seriously. So we're going to look at the evidence, the real scientific claims that suggest that the asteroid didn't ever actually hit, or that dinosaurs never walked the earth and evolution never happened.
Oh my God, I've got to be honest, I've never actually heard of this conspiracy theory before. So it's interesting that you said like quite a few of your friends have mentioned it. But let's start, and I find this quite surprising based on my own knowledge, but let's start with the asteroid theory.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we all like know the general story, like the asteroid hit, that's what like wiped out the dinosaurs. But as I said, the reason that I'm doing this episode is because my friends started asking questions about it at the zoo, and I was like, do you know what, babe? I actually don't know. I don't know anything about the asteroid, where it supposedly hit. I just don't know anything. So let's get into the story about the asteroid, or the story that we've all been told. So supposedly around 66 million years ago, right at the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene periods, Earth was struck by an asteroid roughly 10 to 12 kilometers wide, and it hit near the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, forming what's now known as the 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗃 crater. So the asteroid was traveling at over 20 kilometers per second and released energy equivalent to more than 100 million megatons of TNT. So it was one of the most violent events in Earth's history. Now, the impact of the asteroids hitting the Earth flung billions of tons of vaporized rock into space, and within minutes, molten debris was raining back down on Earth, which set off global wildfires. But the real devastation came from what followed after the asteroid hit. So the asteroid struck sulfur-rich rock, sending aerosols into the atmosphere. Sunlight was then blocked. The planet then plunged into what we call an impact winter, and temperatures dropped by up to 10 degrees. Plants and plankton died, food chains collapsed within months, and in the oceans, acidification wiped out entire species. Now, on land, more than 75% of all species went extinct, including the non-avian dinosaurs. And the survivors were mostly small burrowing animals and a few feathered dinosaurs, what we now know as birds. And we'll get more into that later. Now, around the world, scientists have found a thin layer of clay called the 𝗾𝘃𝗃 boundary. It's rich in something called iridium, which is a metal that is really rare on Earth, but it's commonly found in asteroids, which is supposed to be supposed evidence of a massive impact. But not everybody agrees with this theory, and some scientists blame massive volcanic eruptions like the Deccan Traps in India, and some, well, they just say the whole thing is a cover-up because if you believe those people, the asteroid never hit, and then therefore the dinosaurs, they never existed at all.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think it's funny what you say about not knowing where the asteroid hit, because I think I saw a TikTok video a few months ago, and it was like you can literally see apparently where the asteroid hit on like Google Maps, and I didn't know that. And you can like see this massive crater like near Mexico. So I thought that was so interesting. But obviously at this point in the series, we've realized that there's always people who refuse to believe science, but also we've discovered that sometimes those people can be right. So I'm curious, where did this theory even start, and what evidence is there that it is all fake?
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot. So let's just get straight into it today. And I want to start with the fossils. So these are the very things that are supposed to prove that dinosaurs ever actually existed, right? Like if you've ever walked into a natural history museum, you've probably seen those massive dinosaur skeletons on display. But here's the thing that most people do not realize, and I guess I've never really thought about it, and for some people it might be obvious, but for some people it's not, but those are not actually real bones. They are casts, so plaster replicas of the original fossils. Now, the actual fossilized bones are often too heavy, too fragile, and too valuable to display. So sometimes only one or two bones in an entire exhibit are actually like the real deal, and the rest have just been reconstructed. Now, in science, this process is known as comparative anatomy. So it's a method where scientists use existing fossils from related species to make educated inferences about what the rest of the skeleton would have actually looked like. So it's evidence-based, and it is rooted in the idea that based on what we know about the anatomy of related creatures, we can obviously like deduce the missing parts. And I think we spoke about this in the Jurassic Park episode, and there's probably some overlap as we go through this whole episode with our Jurassic Park episode. So if you like this episode and you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that, because that was really great. But for conspiracy theorists, they argue that this whole thing about like fossils being in museums and them kind of like filling in the missing gaps is actually more just about storytelling and making money than it is about science. So they will say that, for example, like if we don't have a complete dinosaur skeleton, then we shouldn't really be guessing what it looked like. So to them, it feels like paleontology is just simply filling in the blanks with imagination and then presenting that as fact of like, okay, this is what the dinosaur looks like, when in reality, a lot of people question whether we can actually be sure that's what the dinosaur looked like. And another note on this as well is, you know how, for example, if you look at the dinosaur book and you see a T-Rex versus a Stegosaurus and you can see all the physical differences and like different colours and stuff, then a really big thing that people say is like, oh, well, how the hell do you know what it looks like from fossils? So yeah, basically people just think that like the whole of paleontology is just based on lies.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we definitely kind of touched on that in the Jurassic Park episode for sure, because they talked about how we know a lot more about what dinosaurs look like. And like part of that was that they were feathered because there was like imprints of feathers on the rock. Obviously in Jurassic Park, they look like scaly lizards. But yeah, that's a fair question. Why don't they show the real bones?
Yeah, and I guess like the controversy deepens with this whole idea of paleontology being a lie when you actually look at the early history of dinosaur science, because paleontology as a formal discipline actually started out with lies and deceit. And this is something known as the Bone Wars. So you guys might have heard about it before, but back in the late 1800s, the Bone Wars started. And there were these two paleontologists, Marsh and 𝗏𝘁𝗃, who were basically just a couple of arsehole scientists who literally just hated each other. So it wasn't really about science at this point. It was about who could get their name in the history books first. So basically they were just like at war about who could find the most fossils the quickest, who could find the most, like the newest dinosaur, or who could find the coolest fossil. And yeah, basically they were just at war to see who could find things the quickest and publish things the quickest. Now, between them, they named over 130 new dinosaur species, which sounds pretty impressive, but later analysis revealed that many of these were duplicates, fragmentary remains, or just outright mistakes. So, for example, let's take Brontosaurus, a dinosaur that most of us grew up with and we've heard about. Now, this was created by Marsh in 1879. So he assembled the skeleton from various bones, but no skull was ever actually found. So instead of waiting to see if they could actually find the correct skull, he actually just used the wrong one, possibly from a Camarasaurus. Even worse, Marsh had already named a very similar dinosaur 2 years earlier, an Apatosaurus. And according to the rules of scientific naming, known as the principle of priority, the first valid name must take precedence. And that means that Apatosaurus should have been the correct name all along. But Marsh pressed ahead and the name Brontosaurus stuck in the public's minds, even though it was actually scrapped by the scientific community for over a century. And this wasn't the only case. So Marsh and 𝗏𝘃 were known to sabotage each other's digs, bribe fossil collectors, and rush findings into publication before they could actually be properly reviewed. So when conspiracy theorists point to the early years of dinosaur science and say it was all a big mess, it was all based on lies, they're not actually entirely wrong. And it doesn't help that paleontology itself didn't truly begin to take form as a formal scientific discipline until the 1800s. So dinosaurs weren't officially named until 1841, which is strikingly late considering that humans have been documenting animals, plants, and I guess like the natural world for thousands of years prior to this. So basically people asked why weren't dinosaurs included in ancient texts or depictions, and why there are no mentions of fossils in records from older civilizations.
That is really strange. And I think it's especially interesting considering like mythology and legends about dragons and things across different cultures as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess you could argue that like maybe because like dinosaurs weren't actually named, like we just said, until 1841. So maybe these dragons that I spoke about in text, like maybe they are the dinosaurs, but conspiracy theories, just something they like to say is like, oh, well, they're not mentioned in early ancient texts, so they can't be real. But I don't necessarily know that I agree with that. But anyway, it actually does get stranger, this whole paleontology and like paleontology being based on lies. So we need to touch on the fossil forging industry in China. In 1999, a fossil named 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗯𝗯 was supposed to be the newly found crucial link between birds and dinosaurs. And it was actually so big at the time that even the National Geographic featured it in like a major spread. But it actually turned out later that the 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗯𝗯 was all fake, and the so-called missing link was actually a composite made by gluing two completely different fossils together. And this wasn't just a one-off. So over the years, dozens of fake fossils have emerged, with scammers combining chicken bones with lizard tails to create new species and selling them on for huge profits. And the plot thickens even further because in 2005, a scientist named Mary Schweitzer cracked open a fossilized T-Rex femur, and inside she found soft tissue, blood vessels, and even protein fragments. Now, this T-Rex was supposed to be 65 million years old, and soft tissue does not survive that long, so it should have turned to rock by now. So people are asking, how did it last? And some argue that it means that we just don't fully understand the process of fossilization. But others, well, they say that it's proof that the fossil might not be as old as we think, or that it could be fake, which is just absolutely wild.
Yeah, that is so wild. Like, I'm probably going to refer to the Jurassic Park episode quite a lot in this, but we also touched on whether it would be possible to make dinosaurs based on DNA. And basically, the dinosaurs lived so long ago that there is no DNA, which kind of adds to this theory, right? And also adds to the whole weirdness that there was soft tissue, because that, like, the oldest DNA we've ever found, I think, is from a woolly mammoth, which was millions of years after the dinosaurs were even a thing. So yeah, that's really interesting. So, okay, so let's say so fossils are fake, right? How do we know that the asteroid impact story isn't also fake?
So, of course, some people do believe that the asteroid story itself is all fake. Like, I do kind of get it in a way, I'm not going to lie, because, like, are we supposed to believe that it happened 66 million years ago and it literally hasn't happened since? Do you know what I mean? I just kind of find that, like, a bit odd. I don't know. You'd think like if this huge planet altering event really went down, then we'd kind of see more evidence of like similar events throughout history, if that makes any sense. So like, why has an asteroid not hit the Earth since? And there is actually this theory about the Deccan traps in India. So some argue that the crater wasn't actually caused by an asteroid at all, but by massive volcanic eruptions that happened over hundreds of thousands of years. And these eruptions released huge amounts, and I should say the Deccan traps are basically just like loads of volcanoes in India. And essentially, these eruptions, they were happening for over hundreds of thousands of years, and they released huge amounts of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which did in fact cause climate disruption. And the sulfur dioxide would have blocked sunlight, cooling the Earth significantly, while the carbon dioxide would have contributed to a greenhouse effect later on, causing global warming. And this prolonged volcanic activity could have messed with the climate enough to actually cause a mass extinction, just like an asteroid impact would. So it's a slower process, but it is still deadly. And there's also a theory suggesting that dinosaurs were actually already facing declines before the asteroid ever struck. So evidence shows that environmental stress factors like volcanic activity, sea level changes, and climate shifts were already impacting ecosystems, so much so that the dinosaurs were actually already going extinct. And then some people believe that the Deccan traps were just like the last, like the straw that broke the camel's back, really, and just actually led to their extinction, rather than it being like this huge catastrophic event where like this asteroid hit. And yeah, there's a lot of science behind like how this idea that the dinosaurs were already going extinct, and fossil records do actually show signs of ecological stress, with some species showing evidence of decline. So yeah, that is this whole theory that they were basically just going extinct before this, and it wasn't the asteroid that actually made them go extinct. But we're not going to jump too much into that theory, but there's some really great YouTube videos on it that I did watch. So if you're interested in that whole theory, then definitely go and give them the watch. But let's turn to iridium. So earlier in the episode, I mentioned iridium, and this is the smoking gun for the asteroid impact theory, right? So what I mean by that is the iridium is supposed to be like the best evidence for the fact that the asteroid did actually hit, because iridium is commonly found in asteroids, and essentially iridium was just found all across the globe, and people are just like, well, it's not really a metal that's normally found on Earth, so it must have come from an asteroid hitting. And if we find it all across the globe, then that is really good evidence for the asteroid theory. But actually, iridium is also found in the Earth's mantle, and some argue that the volcanic eruptions, like those from the Deccan traps, could have actually brought it to the surface. So it's possible that we are just misinterpreting the iridium layer as evidence of the asteroid, when it actually could just be a byproduct of volcanic activity. And then you've got the survival of things like birds and crocodiles. So if this event was as devastating as we are led to believe, then how did these creatures manage to survive? Could the asteroid impact have been exaggerated, or was there potentially another cause for the extinction of the dinosaurs, like I've just kind of hinted at?
Yeah, I do agree that how could you interpret like how catastrophic that asteroid hitting was? I think it's quite hard, in my opinion. Well, from what I've heard from you now, that it's quite hard to interpret that. But how could these volcanic eruptions cause as much destruction to the point where like species are going extinct? I mean, how could something like the Deccan traps be just as deadly as an asteroid, for an example?
Yeah, so I kind of talked about it a little bit just a second ago, but basically, as I said, they're these huge volcanic regions that erupted over like a long period. And as I said earlier, they released sulfur dioxide, which would have actually blocked out the sunlight, which would have cooled the Earth and created what we spoke about earlier, which is known as an impact winter. And over time, the carbon dioxide buildup would have caused global warming. And it's kind of like a 1-2 punch of cooling followed by warming, plus acid rain and toxic air. So the volcanic activity was a slower disaster, but it could have wiped out enough species for it to count as an extinction event. So the asteroid might not have been the sole cause after all. It could have just been one part of a much bigger, more complex climate disaster.
I also think, though, what you said about 66 million years and not seeing another asteroid hit in that time, tied to that magnification. But you could say the same thing for the volcanic eruptions, right? Because we have volcanoes, but like we've not experienced an event where so much sulfur dioxide is released into the atmosphere and then we have the same sort of effect. So I'm a bit skeptical about that. But
that's a very good point.
Yeah, but going back to birds and crocs, they survive an extinction event that wiped out most other life. That is a bit hard to ignore. I mean, how do they make it through whilst, like you said, so much else didn't?
Yeah, that's the key question. So let's break this down scientifically. So we have been told, like I said earlier, that birds evolved from dinosaurs, but when you start looking at the fossil record, it is full of gaps, and fossils don't show any real transitional forms between the theropod dinosaurs and birds. So instead, we get full, well-formed creatures. So for instance, we know that some dinosaurs had feathers, like 𝗾𝗂𝗃𝗁𝗃, but that's one of the few examples. And the rest, they're just all of a sudden fully developed birds, no real missing link. And that's what makes it weird, because if birds evolved from dinosaurs, then why don't we see the intermediate fossils that show the gradual transition? Like, it just doesn't add up, basically, when we look deeply at the fossil record.
And I think there's similar conspiracy theories for humans, right? Is that there's like a missing link between apes and humans, but I think that has been debunked. But that's definitely another conspiracy.
I weirdly ended up on that side of YouTube and was watching some videos about that, and it has been debunked. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting that they see a similar thing with birds and dinosaurs. So I guess my question is, shouldn't we see more fossils that show evolutionary progression, like one step after another almost? Yeah, exactly. And it gets even stranger when you look at the embryos of modern birds. So if we take chickens, for example, during their development, they actually grow teeth, like real teeth. And technically this shouldn't be happening because adult chickens do not have teeth, and reptiles don't normally have teeth in their adult forms either. So this is an ancestral trait showing a vestige of reptilian evolution. And some researchers, like those studying at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, have been looking at how certain genes like sonic hedgehog and BMP4 are involved in tooth development in reptiles, and also how these genes are expressed in bird embryos. And it's almost like evolution didn't entirely shut off these ancient traits, and they actually resurface during development.
It's so interesting because I did not know that about chickens. That's so weird. But I know they say like chickens, they make a joke that chickens used to be T-Rex, and like they've evolved into this like mundane creature when they used to be this like magnificent T-Rex. But what happens to the teeth then? Do they lose them as they grow? What does that mean for evolution then, I guess?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, isn't it? So what this suggests is that evolution might not obviously be as straightforward as we think, and it's not just about a gradual progression from one species to another, but there's actually a lot more nuance. So it's more like the genome has these switches that can be flipped on or off depending on environmental factors, or perhaps other hidden genetic processes. So when we see things like teeth growing in bird embryos, it's not just some developmental oddity, it's a huge clue that actually birds and reptiles might share more genetic and epigenetic overlap than we once thought. Just real quick for anyone who doesn't know what epigenetics is, I just mentioned about how you can have these genes being switched on or off, and that is essentially the study of epigenetics. Essentially, it's just a layer of information that sits on top of your DNA that controls how your genes are expressed. So yeah, essentially it might not just be the genes themselves, but it might actually be about how these genes are actually regulated, how they're expressed, and how environmental factors or epigenetic modifications might be actually reactivating ancient traits. So could this be evidence of a deeper evolutionary connection that we are still actually unraveling? And it makes you wonder how much of evolution is actually controlled by epigenetics and not just the raw DNA sequence. And I appreciate I've kind of gone from like presenting the evidence for the whole theory that dinosaurs aren't real, and then I've just kind of hit you with some science that kind of goes against that. So sorry if I just like throw a spanner in the works there, but let's take it back to like supporting the theory. So then we have this fish called the coelacanth, and for decades scientists thought that the coelacanth, which is a fish with lobe fins, they think that it went extinct 65 million years ago, only to discover that in 1938 it was still swimming off the coast of South Africa. So it's often considered a living fossil. But what if the real lesson here is that evolutionary pathways are not as straightforward as we think? And if we have been wrong about the coelacanth, could other ancient species also be hiding in plain sight?
Yeah, I think this is interesting as well, because obviously we spoke about DNA earlier and that it's not preserved with like from millions and millions of years ago. So it's not like we can compare the DNA from species that are around today with the dinosaurs. We just have to assume that like there is some similarity, and like genes have been switched on or off, which is what you've been saying. So instead of, I guess what we're kind of saying is that instead of gradual evolutionary transitions, we're kind of seeing these throwbacks to ancient features that don't kind of fit this clean, progressive model that we've, I guess, been taught about and what we're used to. So it kind of makes you question what we really know about evolution itself.
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like epigenetics and evolution is becoming quite a big thing, because I actually went to a talk the other day at work, and there was a guy who studies, he's a geneticist who studies evolution, but he was talking more about how like epigenetics and evolution is becoming more of a popular thing. And I think that's so interesting.
Okay, Liv, you've thrown a lot at us here. So can we start breaking this down? Let's start with the basics. Are fossils really fake? Surely there's more to the story. And what's the science behind all of this?
Yes, first up, fossils. So my initial thought was like, okay, that's a bit weird. But when I started thinking more deeply about it, actually, why the hell would they put all of the real bones in the museum? The last thing, obviously, you want to do is risk damaging the originals. So instead, yes, museums use cast, plaster replicas that help protect the delicate bones while still allowing us to study them. And the skeletons that we see in museums are often made from casts, but that doesn't mean that fossils themselves aren't real. So if we take Sue, the famous T-Rex at the Field Museum in Chicago, she is actually over 90% real bone. But the skull, however, is displayed separately because it's too fragile to be shown with the rest of the body. Now, some people argue that we don't have enough fossil evidence to know what dinosaurs were really like, but actually that is quite far from the case, because fossils are everywhere, and there are fossilized embryos, fossilized skin, and even fossilized poop. So for instance, 𝗾𝘂𝗁𝗯𝗯𝗯𝗏, dinosaur poop, was found by scientists in Utah in 1998. Why did they get such a fancy name for their poo? It's so scientific. But these contained bone fragments, proving that dinosaurs that left them were feeding on other animals. So my initial question was, well, how do you confirm that they're dinosaurs and they're not just like elephants or woolly mammoths or some other huge species? So they did this by analysing the size, shape and content of the 𝗾𝘂𝗁𝗯𝗯𝗏, plus the fact that the fossils were found in rock layers containing dinosaur tracks further confirmed that they came from dinosaurs. So these aren't just props in a museum, they are geological time capsules, providing us with actually an incredibly detailed look at what life was like millions of years ago. And we're not just talking about bones and tracks. So let's take it back to Mary Schweitzer's discovery of soft tissue in a T-Rex femur in 2005, because this gives us an even deeper look at these creatures. Now, some people argue that this soft tissue proves the fact that fossils can't be as old as 65 million years. But here's the thing, the soft tissue wasn't just like magically preserved. So she didn't just cut it open and just find this soft tissue, like it was just sat there waiting for her. It was actually found after weeks of a process called demineralization. So this means that the bone was soaked in a weak acid to dissolve away the mineralized parts, which left behind the organic material like collagen, blood vessels, and even tiny fragments of protein. And so this didn't just happen overnight. And it's not evidence that the T-Rex is only a few thousand years old. It's just a very complex and very rare preservation process that can happen under the right conditions. So no, it didn't survive for millions of years. It was actually carefully scientifically extracted, giving us a rare glimpse into the biology of a creature that lived so long ago. Now, let's talk about the idea that all dinosaurs are fake. So some people claim that all the fossils are just fabricated, they're plaster replicas, there's no real bones. But here is actually the scientific reality. It's not just one dinosaur or a handful of fossils that we're talking about here. There are thousands of dinosaur fossils discovered across the world. Each fossil is embedded in different rock layers, each preserved in distinct geological contexts, which all independently support the existence of dinosaurs. So if every single dinosaur fossil were fake, you would be literally looking at the largest and most widespread scientific conspiracy ever conceived, with thousands of different scientists involved. Paleontologists, geologists, museums, and even fossil hunters would all have to be in on it. And here's the thing, to me, I'm sorry, but that is just not plausible. And so let's break down the science of fossils. So fossils, especially dinosaur fossils, are not just discovered by chance. Paleontologists use a technique called stratigraphy to identify the age of the rock layers in which fossils are found. And the principle of superposition tells us that the lower layers of rock are older than those above them, and this gives us a really good time frame for fossils. On top of that, radiometric dating methods such as carbon dating for more recent fossils and uranium lead dating for older fossils allow us to determine the age of the surrounding rocks. So these methods are not only accurate, but they are used across geology and archaeology to date material on a timescale that spans millions and potentially even billions of years. And we're not just finding the same species over and over, we are uncovering different types of dinosaurs, herbivores, carnivores, theropods, sauropods, which are all spread out across the globe with distinct features, but the same anatomical patterns that tell us that they are related. So we even find, for example, evidence of dinosaur behavior through fossils of nests, footprints, and coprolites, which we just spoke about, which help us reconstruct how they lived, ate, and moved, which all feeds into how we have like a picture of what a dinosaur looks like or the features that it might have had, because we can kind of infer that from our understanding of how they lived from the fossils. So when conspiracy theorists claim that dinosaurs are a hoax, they're not just questioning like one single fossil, they're actually questioning an entire body of evidence that spans over a century of scientific work in paleontology, geology, and chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe this conspiracy theory at all, but how does this tie in with the asteroid impact theory? I mean, we've got real evidence of dinosaurs, but what was the deal with the 𝗾 boundary and the iridium stuff that is supposed to point to the asteroid?
Yeah, good question. So first off, the 𝗾 boundary itself, this layer rich in iridium that I spoke about, that has been found in sediments across the globe from places like Italy, the United States, and even Antarctica. Now, the key here is that iridium, like I said, is a rare metal on Earth, but it is much more common in meteorites and asteroids. So the theory is that when the asteroid struck, it deposited this iridium across the planet. And the 𝗾 boundary layer rich in iridium acts like a timestamp, pinpointing the exact moment of impact. And the iridium levels that we see in the 𝗾 boundary are up to 30 times higher than normal, which is practically a neon sign saying asteroid impact. And it's important to note that, okay, the Deccan Traps in India, some people say that brought up the iridium from the Earth's core mantle, that's it. But then how the hell is it in India? Do you know what I mean? But the iridium alone isn't enough to convince scientists. And that is where glass spirals come in. So these are tiny spherical droplets of glass that were formed when vaporized rock from the impact condensed into the atmosphere. So when the asteroid struck, the heat was so intense that it vaporized rock and it sent it high into the atmosphere. And as it cooled, it formed these microscopic glass beads, which have been found all over the globe. And these spirals, along with the iridium, confirm that something enormous and fiery hit Earth, not just a regular volcanic eruption or anything like that. Now, let's talk about shocked quartz. This is a bit more technical, but basically, shocked quartz is a form of quartz that forms under extremely high pressure, like what you would get from an asteroid impact. And there was a study, which shout out to everyone in my office because they told me about the study, but there was a study that came out in 2020 by 𝗾𝘂𝗲𝗯𝗯𝗯𝗃 et al. And the researchers analysed these quartz grains found in the 𝗾 boundary and showed that their formation could have only occurred under conditions of extreme pressure that is consistent with an asteroid impact, not volcanic eruptions. So when they found shocked quartz, it was basically the final nail in the coffin for the asteroid theory being true. And the icing on the cake is obviously the 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗃 crater. So the size and age of the 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗃 crater in Mexico perfectly match the timing of the mass extinction. The crater is about 180 kilometers in diameter, and the geophysical data we have from drilling into the crater matches the scale of an impact that could have caused the environmental chaos we see in the fossil record. And that's not just coincidence, because it lines up with the timing, iridium, the shocked quartz, and the spirals.
I find that so interesting, and how all the timings add up. Like, to me, that's undeniable evidence. So that's really interesting, and I've genuinely never heard about any of that. So I feel like I learn something new on this podcast literally every week. But let's take it back to the evolutionary aspects of this, because obviously there's still a missing link. So why was it that animals that evolved then into crocs and birds managed to survive whilst like seemingly a lot of other species didn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are a few reasons why crocs and birds managed to survive when the other species didn't. So first, obviously, birds being small, mobile, the fact that they can fly, obviously, had a huge advantage in a world devastated by the asteroid impact. So they could obviously just fly away from the harsh environments. They could find food more easily and obviously avoid many of the extreme conditions on the ground that the dinosaurs wouldn't have been able to like fly away from. Crocs, on the other hand, are incredibly resilient and can go for really long periods without food, which makes them obviously highly adaptable. And the fact that they can survive in both land and aquatic environments was obviously also very helpful. Earlier, I spoke about how 𝗾𝘂𝗹𝗯𝗯 brought up the coelacanth, which is a fish that was thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So the question is, why did this fish survive when so many others went extinct? But the coelacanth survival shows us that evolution, as we said earlier, doesn't always follow a straightforward progressive path. And some species evolve readily to adapt, while others hold on to older traits that help them survive extreme conditions. And this idea aligns with why birds and crocs survived when the dinosaurs didn't. And it's because they have evolved certain traits that made them more resilient.
Yeah, and I think obviously you said in the part in this episode that fossils are like formed under rare circumstances, right? So I feel like we're not always going to see the direct link of evolution anyway if if there are physically no fossils. Also, not to mention, we've probably not like managed to find every single fossil ever made. So I feel like the evidence that we do have is pretty compelling that dinosaurs existed. So like fossils, DNA. So, but obviously we spoke about the asteroid and it hitting and having not had a similar event like that. So is it a real possibility then that we could also, like, we could be struck by an asteroid in the future?
We definitely wouldn't survive as humans, would we?
No, I don't think we would.
Yeah, evolution has not got our back. But anyway, yeah, could it happen again? Well, actually, it turns out that big asteroids are in fact still a huge threat. And a 10-kilometer asteroid, one big enough to cause global extinction, actually is estimated to hit the Earth about once every 100 million years. But smaller asteroids, say about, I don't know, maybe 1 kilometer in size, still actually pose a serious threat with a 1 in a million chance of hitting Earth each year. And then there are these city killer asteroids, which are around 50 meters in size, and these hit Earth roughly every 900 years. So we know that the risk is real, especially considering that 70% of Earth's surface is actually covered by oceans, meaning that potentially a lot of impacts we might not actually even know about as the general public because they hit the ocean and like maybe NASA just don't tell us about it. I don't know. Anyway, if the stats are correct, we have roughly 34 million years, before another huge asteroid hits the Earth and absolutely wipes us out.
Thank you so much for that, Liv. Like I really enjoyed this episode. I think it's nice when we cover something that's not too like, I don't know, biologically focused, or
yeah.
I quite like it when it has an aspect of history. So that was super interesting. And obviously, if you guys want to learn anything more, we always leave links in the description below. But for now, we've got a very interesting listener story. So let's get into it.
Let's go.
All right, so our gossip for today starts off with someone stole gold from our professor and I saw who did it. So random.
What?
Now, before I tell you what I did, I want to get your opinion about what you would have done. I'm in my second semester studying bioinformatics. Slay. And this happened in my first semester. So this all happened on one of the first classes we had with this professor, and he was talking about metal and its properties. And through that discussion, he told us that he bought a thin sheet of gold for this lecture a few years ago and wanted to pass it around so we could see it and touch it. As it was about to come to me, I saw this guy, let's name him Gavin, breaking off a piece of the gold. It's called a 𝗾𝗂𝗃𝗀𝗯 bar, and it looks like a cardboard thin chocolate bar. Now, Gavin is my friend's boyfriend, and I went into full-on panic mode. My friend was sitting next to me in the lecture hall and did not notice a thing. So what would you guys have done? He stole this gold for himself and pretended that he didn't do anything. And she's actually told us what she's done, so we can discuss. And then...
Okay, let's discuss first. First of all, I've got to Google this. I want to know what it looks like. Oh my God, it does look like a chocolate bar. Oh my God, he didn't.
What an idiot, though. Like,
can I just say, as a lecturer, there is no way I'm buying a sheet of gold and then I'm handing it around to a bunch of undergraduates. So I kind of want to say that was a dumb move from the lecturer, but also he should be able to trust adults with
100%
gold thing. But okay, guys, so if you're listening, Google this 𝗾𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗯 bar gold card and just have a look at it, because I feel like it's important context, because it does look like a chocolate bar. So like you could, I don't know how easy gold is to break, but it looks like you could easily like snap a bit off. Yeah, what would I do?
Yeah, we were saying like, oh, the professor's kind of stupid, but I'm like, oh, bless him, he just wanted to bring like a little show and tell kind of thing and be really involved in the lecture.
Show and tell. Do you remember that when you were younger, you had to be like show and tell? I remember once I went to, this might be too niche for everybody, so like apologize if this is too niche, but did anyone listen to Lamar? Yes, I remember my most proud show and tell moment was when I went to watch Lamar in Ipswich Region Theatre, which is like a tiny theatre. And I got one of the programmes and I decided that was what I was going to take into show and tell. And I just remember the whole class was looking at me like, and I was like, so proud of it.
Such a funny show and tell story. When I was in year 2, so I was like, don't know how old you are then, like probably like
6, 7.
I basically, when I was younger, I used to write to a fairy. It was obviously my mum at the time.
We all did.
I had like all like little bits that my fairy had left for me, and like my note, like the letters from her and stuff. And I did a show and tell on my fairy to all the kids in the rest of my class. And
wait, what do you mean? What, you showed like the letters, or like you had like
letters and like little trinkets that she got me, and like supposedly what she looked like? And it's so funny because there was a girl in my class who was like, oh my God, I just started writing to my fairy and she replied. So basically I inadvertently got someone else's parents stuck in this trap of writing letters as a fairy to their kid.
What did you write to her about? Like, what kind of things would you say?
Oh, I don't even know. I can't remember. I think it was kind of like a way of my mum getting me to write and stuff and be like descriptive and things like that. And also, I guess it was like an insight into what I was thinking as like a very young child. And I tried to like, I had a little inkling that it was my mum, and then I tried to catch her out because my mum used to go away on like trips, and I would write to my fairy while she was gone. My mum must have pre-written letters because I still got a reply.
Oh, that's so sweet of your mum. But yeah, I agree. I think he was probably, I mean, yeah, when you think about it, it's really sweet. Like, you know, he just wanted to show his enthusiasm, get people excited about it.
Yeah.
And then we've got fucking Gavin over here just being a little stingy whatever and just snapping off a bit of the chocolate bar. Do you know what I mean?
I'm not going to lie. I mean, I would have definitely just told on him.
Yeah, same. I would have said to him, like, what are you doing? But then once you snapped it off, whether you can't do it, you can't put it back. It's done then. You've ruined it.
Yeah. Oh, that's sad.
Assuming they were passing it around like a whole group of like undergrads or like a whole lecture hall, I 100% would have been like, my initial reaction without even thinking would have been like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, I just would have immediately reacted like that
same.
anyway. I wouldn't have been like, oh my God, no. I literally just automatically would have been like, what the fuck are you doing? And then I just would have called you out on it in front of everyone, because yeah, at our age, like, we really shouldn't be doing stuff like that. Like, have some more respect. And
Yeah, I
that's just
agree.
so embarrassing, to be honest. So
I guess
absolutely
you've got
would have
the
called it
added
out.
complexity of like Gavin being your like best mate's boyfriend as well.
That probably just means you don't like him anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, who likes for the most part, when you're like undergraduate age, who likes their partner's boyfriend? Or was it just my friends?
I mean, if you're doing
decisions,
stuff like that, then like that's red flag. That's so weird.
It is red flag, because yeah, it's just weird behavior. Like, you're a thief, basically. So
Also, as the best friend, I'd be embarrassed if my boyfriend did that. Like, that is so embarrassing.
yeah, that's what I'm
Like,
saying.
I know
But
undergrad times are really hard in terms of like not being able to afford anything.
So in answer to her question then, before we hear what she did, I absolutely would have called him out on it, and I would have not cared that it was my friend's boyfriend.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with you.
Okay, come on, I want to hear what she did.
Okay, so she said, after class, my professor sent an email asking anyone who saw someone take a piece of gold, which was about $200 worth, from his chocolate bar looking gold. And I did, in fact, email him, telling him who took the gold. And it did not end well for him, but my friend never knew I was the one who reported him. They are still in a relationship, even though he is a dickhead.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
My first question is like, why was it an email after? Did he not get it back in that moment and be like, where's the gold? Like, a square's missing here. But then maybe he didn't want to make a scene in the actual, or maybe he just genuinely didn't notice. But I mean, good on you for telling on him, because yeah, that's so disrespectful and rude. And it's not even like, oh, you're dobbing him in. Like, no, that's so immature.
Literally stealing.
He's literally a thief. Like, yeah, 100% dob him in.
Oh my God.
Also, I'm not saying it's a red flag, so don't take this the wrong way, but the fact that you're saying like, oh, my friend never knew that it was me, why not? Like, why not? Because what, is she going to get mad at you? Because then she's literally, basically, essentially going to be getting mad at you for his
thievery.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, it's awkward, isn't it? Like, we've all had a friend whose boyfriend we really did not like. And I feel like there's only so much you can say, isn't there? You can say like, red flag, he's a dick. But if they still continue to date him and don't see the red flags, then it's just kind of awkward at that point, and you just kind of look like you're too invested in their relationship. So,
and listen, we all ignore red flags, you know. Right before we started recording this episode, I was explaining some red flags that I have ignored to Taz. Like, we've all been there. And even now at my age of 27, I think I am clever enough and not stupid enough to like ignore these red flags, but we all do. Like, sometimes you're just blinded by love. So it is what it is. She's young. I'm not saying that every single person who's in a relationship at that age is not going to work out, but 9 times out of 10, it doesn't really work out. It's not really a long-term thing, especially when you're at university, because most times you end up like moving apart anyway. So yeah, she's ignoring the red flags. That's what she's going to do for now, and it is what it is.
And also rate her for doing the right thing.
100%. And when she says like it didn't end well for him, I want to know like what happened. Did he get kicked off the course? Did he get kicked off that module? Like, what happened? Did he have to return it, pay for it? Like, what happened? Or did he just deny it? We always want
to know more about this, don't we? Always want to know more about all of the gossip that we get in. So if you're listening and you are happy unanonymizing yourself and messaging us, please let us know.
100%. And this is just something for all of the other listeners as well. It's like, sometimes we get sent in emails, or like people fill out our anonymous form, and like they'll say like, oh, you know, I don't want to make this too long, or blah, blah, blah. Make it as long as you can. And give us all the details, photos, just all the information that you could possibly give us, we will happily have, because if you listen regularly, you know that we always just have so many questions after the end of every laboratory, like, oh my God, what happened next? But yeah, that's just insane. And he just sounds like an awful person, to be honest, because how immature are you? at your ripe age of 18 to 21, however old you are. I mean, she said they're in their first year, so they must be like 19. That you're stealing. Like, get a grip. Get a grip on your life, Gavin.
But thanks so much for writing in. I feel like we didn't have to give any advice because she already rectified the situation. And obviously, if you're listening and you have a situation that you just want us to discuss or talk about, please write in. We always leave an anonymous link in the description. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the episode.
Oh my God,
next week, we are going to be talking about chemtrails and whether there is any truth behind the chemical trails that you see left behind by planes in the sky.
I'm so excited to learn about chemtrails because I feel like it's been all the rave recently, and all of the conspiracy theorists in my life that I know are sharing stuff endlessly on Instagram about chemtrails. So I'm excited to have the knowledge behind me for this one. So yeah, we will see you guys next week, and thank you so much for joining us. Bye everyone.
Bye.